Good morning. I know that's an uncomfortable passage, and I know lust is an uncomfortable topic. And that's okay. Do we really want to walk out of here this morning saying, I just really felt I felt really comfortable during that sermon on lust today? No, it would probably mean that we didn't actually deal with it or really talk about it. We should feel uncomfortable. And in that discomfort, we can feel many different things along with it. But here's a couple of things I don't want you to feel. Number one is alone. You are not alone in your own personal struggle against lust. However difficult it may be in your life right now. Even Jesus was tempted. This week I came across a member of our church out in the wild. And we got to talking about this series, and they asked what sin we'd be covering this week, and I said, well, we'll be covering lust, and they just said, great. I'll see you in 2 weeks. Because you are not alone. Secondly, I don't want you to feel shame. That's not the goal of this sermon, because that wasn't the goal of Jesus when he dealt with those trapped in sexual sin. Shame is a wage of sin. That's what it pays you for working for it. Makes us feel unworthy of relationship. It isolates us and makes us feel as though we are unlovable. But to the shameful one, Jesus goes and he actually invites them into deeper relationship. And he says, do you know how loved you really are? Now, here's what I do want you to feel, or at least what I hope you feel. The first is conviction. Conviction is good. Conviction means that there's a pulse. Conviction is your soul's awareness that the Spirit has come close and he's working on your heart. And secondly, I want you to feel weak. You need to feel weak. With topics like this, we can feel convicted. And when we do, we just grit those teeth. And we are going to try harder. And just let me tell you now, it's not going to work. So it's okay to feel weak. It's okay to feel powerless. And you need to feel that way. Lust is a topic that can be applied to so many different things. And so I want to stay focused this morning and stay on a very particular track. I am not going to talk about lust and apply it to your marriage per se. I'm not going to talk about lust and applying it to your singleness. I'm just going to talk about lust and you as an individual, as a reality for you in your life of faith, whether you're married, whether you're single, young, old, male, female, doesn't matter. Lust is a reality for us all. And I want to take a look at what it does. I want us to see what it does to us and to understand why it's so deadly. So let's start with this. You are in a war. You do not live during peacetime. You are in a cosmic, ancient war. And you have an enemy that goes around roaring like a lion, seeking whom he may devour, and you are on the menu. So is your spouse, so is your marriage, so are your kids, so is your future marriage, and those future kids. And part of the reason we're doing this series is to be reminded of that. to know the attacks of the enemy and to be more vigilant against the reality of sin in our lives and to take a look at its battle plan against us. And to remember that discipleship is walking away from death and unto life daily. Because we are at war. And if you do not have that mindset, then your life is nothing more than trying to have a tea party in the trenches. And you are going to get eaten alive. My grandfather was a World War II vet. He died the day after Thanksgiving in 1969, so I never met him. And so what I know about him comes from my dad. And his first combat experience was in North Africa, fighting against Rockwall. And his first battle was at night, and it was intense. And the Germans were just hitting them all night with everything that they had, trying to break the lines of the Allied forces. And the number one rule of combat is you hold the line. You hold the line at all costs. And so the Germans were pushing against them so hard that they eventually had no choice. They only had one option left, and it was to call in the artillery on top of themselves. Those are hard bombs to drop, knowing they'd be dropping on your own boys. But they knew in order to push back the Germans, it was the only option. And when the bombs started to drop, they knew that the Germans were really close, but they didn't exactly know how close they were. But then when the artillery shells started dropping in and they jumped in their foxholes, the Germans were so close that they started jumping in the foxholes with them. And my grandfather's first combat experience was hand-to-hand combat in a 4-foot hole with bombs dropping all around him. Lust is always close. And it's always lurking. Lust knows where to find you, and it knows when to find you. It finds you when you are alone, and the bombs of life are dropping all around you after a long day of work. Discontent in your marriage, a frustrating season with the kids, when someone or something just makes you feel so small and insignificant. Or when you're envious that another friend got married and you are still single. It finds you in that isolated moment where you just want to escape your circumstances and be left alone. That is when lust jumps in the foxhole with you. So what happens when it does? Well, lust hides. Just like we saw last week with greed. Lust is just like greed. It hides. But there's a difference. Your greed hides from you, but it's you that hides your lust. It jumps in the foxhole with us and we don't kill it. We keep it close. We care for it. We embrace it. It starts so simple. Hiding a fantasy in the mind. Hiding our screen. Or concealing our wandering eyes. And then it goes to work. So we need to ask, what does lust do to us? When it jumps in that foxhole with us, what does it do to us? And secondly, why is it so deadly? But to answer these questions, we can't start with lust. We have to start with love. Just like previous weeks, we have to go back to the garden. We have to go back to the good world that God made and understand the place of sex in that good world. Because lust makes us think sex is bad and dirty and shameful. And our world would look in upon us and say that our God is just prudish and repressive. Please. Sex is a gift from God that God made good and beautiful. Sex was God's idea. And if we go back to the very beginning, the Bible is literally a story that begins with sex and beautiful, unified intimacy. After God created Adam, one of my favorite parts of the story is how it says that God brought all the animals to Adam just to see what he would name them. Adam lived in the presence of God, and he enters into the work that God gave him. But very quickly, we have a problem. Everything that God created was good, but it says there was one thing that was not good. Adam was lonely. He was lonely. God saw that it was not good that he should be alone. He had no companion. He had no counterpart. He had no equal in relationship. So Adam was a bachelor, living with millions of pets in his home. And God said, no, this is not good. So he puts Adam to sleep, takes a rib from his side, and he forms and he fashions a masterpiece called woman. And then Adam wakes up. God says, ta-da. And Adam sees her fully, completely, naked for the first time, and he sings. He says, bone of my bone, flesh of my flesh. Those are wedding vows. Those are wedding vows. I belong to you. I belong to you, woman, my bride, and you belong to me, your husband. It's a mutual self-giving of body and soul, and it says that they were naked and not ashamed. Friends, there are worse ways to start a story. Just take a second and appreciate the goodness and the creative generosity of God. Where's that prudish God at? It doesn't exist. Just think of his attention to our longings and his awareness of our need for satisfaction. And friends, the intimacy of this moment, it's what humanity chases with every lover, every spouse, every hookup. We desire it so deeply in our soul because for it we were made. But we have to see sex in its intended space. It is the natural culmination of covenant commitment. It's a physical expression of a spiritual reality. It's the physical union of a deeper spiritual union. Me for you, and you for me. But then everything falls apart. And it says that the serpent was the most crafty of all the animals, and he slithers into the safety of the foxhole of the garden, and he goes to work. And I just want to point out two things, because this is where we see the seeds of lust. The first is what the serpent actually tempts them with. He points to the fruit and he says, if you eat of it, you will be like God. You will be like God. It's the temptation to grasp at the divine, to no longer be a created being, but to try and become like the Creator. It was to be God. But then they eat of it, and what happens? Well, the first thing it says that they saw that they were naked and they were ashamed. That deep spiritual union was now broken, and that unity of body and soul is now filled with shame that drives them away from one another in true relationship with each other. And then when God finds Adam and Eve hiding, he says to Adam, "What have you done? Did you eat of the tree that I told you not to eat?" And what does Adam say? He says, "It was the woman you gave me. It was the woman you gave me." Those are some of the coldest words in the Bible. In that statement, he shows a complete disregard for the goodness of God towards him, but he also discards his bride. He doesn't even use her name. Now she's just an object that he uses as a means to his own ends for his own benefit. So what does this teach us about lust and why it's so deadly? Everything. Because what happens when the poison of sin infects our desire for relational intimacy? What happens when these dynamics poison our desire for sex and satisfaction and fulfillment? We see it on full display in the story of Amnon and Tamar. And I get it. It's easy to read an extreme story like this and to so quickly remove ourselves from relevance. I think, well, I've never done that, nor would I do that. That's not me. But before you hit the eject button, would you just let the Bible offer its own diagnosis before you offer yours? Sometimes the Bible will use extreme examples like this and show us the fruit so that we understand what's in the seeds. And those seeds are buried deeply in your heart. Amnon was a son of King David, and he desired his half-sister Tamar. And no doubt she was named after her great-great-great-great-great-great-great-grandmother Tamar, who was a righteous, discarded woman that would not be denied God's promises, who God used to bring about his promises. And I know this is a hard story because I know that there's some Tamars in the room. And so why does the Bible put this story in front of us when it's so painful, especially for you? It's because our God keeps a ledger. He keeps a ledger. He does not forget. And he will not forget you the same way he did not forget Tamar, the first or the second. He keeps a ledger, and so you don't have to worry about whether or not his justice will be complete. He's the God who remembers. And the scandal of this story is not that Tamar is Amnon's half-sister. Of course, that's scandalous to us, but in their world, it was common. It wasn't unheard of to marry across those lines under those circumstances. The scandal runs much deeper than that. Amnon desired Tamar. Attraction gave way to hidden fantasy. Fantasy gave way to obsession. And obsession gave way to misery. Lust had slithered into the foxhole of his life. It whispered in his ear. It flashed images across his mind. It inflamed his body, and it tormented his soul, and it made him sick. His lust is eating him alive because it's not just an issue of the body. Sex is an issue of the soul. And the trick of lust is to divorce the body from the soul. It makes us think, if I could just have your body, then it would satisfy my soul. And Amnon falls for the trick, and the noose tightens around Amnon. And then the real temptation comes. Amnon had a friend named Jonadab. And did you notice how it described him? It said that Jonadab was very crafty. Does that sound familiar? There are only 2 times in the Bible where the word crafty is used to describe an individual. It's here, and it's the serpent in the garden. It's wanting you to slam these 2 stories together and recognize that what happened in the garden is playing out all over again. Lust is the temptation to play God. Lust is the temptation to play God. It convinces us to operate by our own plans for our own ends. We decide what will satisfy and gratify our own desires on our own terms. It teaches us how to determine the value of another and the reason that they exist. No longer are they made in the image of God. They are remade by us into an image of our gratification, an object to be enjoyed, a commodity to be consumed. It's determining that they exist for me. Lust gives you that permission to operate according to your own personal satisfaction, to make it central. And it gives you the freedom to say to another, you exist for my gratification. And it all happens in secret. Lust doesn't hide from you. It's you that hides your lust. And lust will make you a lonely little God. Lust teaches us how to create our own little worlds of fantasy, where we are front and center. We get to play God and determine the value and purpose of another. Amnon plays God and determines the value and purpose of Tamar. He creates his own little world by conniving his little plan that places his satisfaction at the very center. And when we try to play God, we destroy, and we become indifferent to the damage. Just like we saw with Adam, Amnon plays God, and then he discards. Amnon immediately hates Tamar in his heart, and he discards her in disgrace. And he bolts the door. He couldn't see, nor did he care about the devastation that he had caused. He was blind. No matter how much you might think lust is not a private sin, you may think your pornography addiction only affects you. It's your own safe little world where you have all the power and all the glory and all the dominion, and you can play out whatever daydream comes to mind. But endless studies have shown that pornography does 2 things. It pushes satisfaction requirements to extremes at the humiliation of another, and it destroys our capacity and desire for real contact and real intimacy. It's because it produces shame. And shame will always push you away from real relationship. Or maybe it's daydreams and fantasies that run through your mind that you don't think impact others. The little world you create is only in your mind, so how could it impact somebody else? But all the while, you're unaware how romance novels or movies or endless wandering eyes or scrolling through profiles of old flings can make you so dissatisfied with your spouse, and you no longer consider their needs, and they're discarded. Because we're busy playing the game of what if? what would life have looked like with them? Lust convinces us to play God. Lust causes us to discard. And finally, lust hides you from seeing the damage. So we need to answer our last question. Why is lust so deadly? There's a part of this story that shows the sweetness of Tamar and the savagery of Amnon. When he lays hold of her, she tells him to stop and to not do this disgraceful thing that is not done in Israel that would bring so much ruin and make him a fool. But did you notice what she offered him? She offered him covenant love. She offered herself to him in the deepest way. She said, just speak to the king, and he will not withhold me from you. She offers herself in marriage. She is the righteous woman that says, you can embrace my body if you're willing to embrace my heart and my soul. I will give myself to you if you are willing to give yourself to me. I offer you my covenant love. And Amnon says, nah. And he ended up hating her because he never wanted her. She was simply a means to his own ends. She just existed for him, and he was unwilling to exist for her. Lust is deadly, and this shows us why. Lust makes you reject covenant love. Lust makes you reject covenant love. It teaches you to get, but never give. It teaches you to only think about the body with no regard for the heart and the soul. Lust makes you reject covenant love, and that's deadly. Why? Well, you have to step back and think about this. Sin catechizes you. Sin raises you up since your youth. Sin trains you in unrighteousness and transforms you into the image and likeness of Satan. You're like, wait, what? Where's that in the Bible? From the beginning. That's why it says there's the seed of the woman and the seed of the serpent. And Jesus says it too. He says to the Pharisees, you look like your father, the devil. You look and you act and you walk and you talk just like your dad. And here's the thing, they didn't even know it, because that's what sin does. It pulls the strings that you don't even know are attached. And if we don't take sin seriously, then we won't be aware of it either. We won't be aware of the ways that it shapes us and transforms us and trains us and teaches us how to relate to everything. So how has your lust trained you? How has your lust taught you to see the world? It teaches us to transform the world into an economy of exchange where others are objectified and exist simply for my gratification, my enjoyment, my pleasure, my advancement, my delight, and I don't have to offer anything in return. And the value of everyone around us is simply based on what they have to offer and how much they satisfy us. Lust shapes us. And if that's true, then we have to take this to its deepest level. Because what if your lust has actually shaped how you relate to God? What if your lust has taught you to treat God just like Amnon treated Tamar? a God who offers you covenant love, life and body and soul. But you say no, because that's not actually what you're interested in. What you're interested in is getting what you want. And you turn your relationship with God into an economy of exchange. Your God says, I give myself to you, my body, my heart, my life. I'm yours. Would you give yourself to me? No, God, actually, I want this. I want you to give me that. Please do this for me. I will approach you with what I want you to give me, not what I can give you. But then what happens? When you don't get what you want, you discard. Kick him out and bolt the door behind him. I'm going to kind of do my own thing on my own terms for a little while because I didn't get what I want. Look, I would imagine if you're someone who is really struggling with lust in your life right now, that if you stepped back and you took an honest look, you're approaching God no differently than a mistress. Where you show up when you want, how you want, to get what you want. Lust has trained you. It shaped you. And lust is deadly because it makes you reject your God's covenant love. So what if that's you? And lust has a grip on your life right now. And you feel conviction, but also conflicted. It's natural for us when we feel any measure of conviction to feel that sense of resolve to change. That's good. But our first instinct is to try harder. You're like, man, I'm going to go into this week and I'm going to drop the elbow on lust like Macho Man Randy Savage off the top rope. No, you're not. You're not. And it's not going to work. And it never will. It's because lust is a noose. The more you fight, the tighter it gets. I said at the beginning, it's okay to feel weak. It's okay to recognize that operating by your own strength and trying harder is exhausting and ultimately it bears no fruit. Why? Because lust is still shaping you when you think that way. It's causing you to still only think in terms of your own body and mustering up the strength that you think you possess, and it disregards the needs of the heart and the soul. Trying harder doesn't factor in that we need a new heart and a new spirit placed within us. That's why it's okay to feel weak, because that's something we don't possess. Because in that weakness, you are ready to receive the covenant love that's offered to you by your God. Your God who offered his very body and his life for you. St. Augustine offered one of the most human prayers that I know of. When he was a teenager, he was promiscuous and notoriously so. But then the Lord began to work on his heart, and he began to feel that new conviction beginning to rise up within him over time, and yet he was so deeply convicted. And so he offers this prayer. He says, Lord, make me chaste, but not yet. I mean, come on. That is the most honest human prayer. He wanted the Lord, he wanted new life, but he also enjoyed the sweetness of sin. He wanted both. And perhaps you feel the same. But as his conviction grew over time, so did all of his efforts. He kept doubling down. He set himself to trying harder, but he kept failing over and over and over again, and his shame only grew with each failure. Lust just still continued to grip his heart. And he wrote this. He said, I went further and further from you, proud in my distress and restless in fatigue, sowing more and more seeds whose only crop was grief. And then one day when he was at a low point, he felt God ask him a question. Why are you relying on yourself, only to find yourself so unreliable? It's when he embraced his weakness and he embraced the covenant love of his God towards him, everything changed and his sorrow turned to singing. When you feel weak, that is when you are ready for the only remedy to lust. It's the covenant love of your God, who gives himself to you fully and completely, and he asks that you give yourself to him in return. Stop trying harder and start entering back into that covenant relationship with your God. And remember this covenant to which you belong that begins with your God saying, love me, the Lord your God, with all your heart, all your soul, all your mind, all your strength. And so enter back into that covenant love once again and say, my Lord and my God, I submit my heart, my soul, my life, my body back to you. It belongs to you, and it is weak. And fighting lust is about learning to rely on his covenant love for you. And loving the Lord your God with all your strength is not about relying on your own strength and ability. It's actually using all of your strength to rely on his strength. So instead of trying to resist temptation, it's every fiber of your being in the moment of temptation, pushing towards him and using your strength to cry out to him for help. Lord Jesus, my God, give me your strength. Give me what I do not possess. Give me a new heart. Give me a new spirit. And if Christ, your covenant love, didn't withhold his body and his very life from you, then why would he withhold his power and his strength when you need it? Your God comes to you this morning at this table and he says, my beloved, O lustful one, O shameful one, do you not know how loved you are? I give myself to you. Will you give yourself to me? For the glory of Christ and the life of the world. Let's pray. Lord Jesus, our covenant love, we ask for freedom. We ask for the chains that bind us to be broken. And we ask that you would teach us what it means to run to you and to rely upon you. Not just in the moment of temptation, but for life itself. Help us to turn away from temptation. Give us the desire to find you in the midst of moments of trial. We ask that you would heal wounds caused by our own lust and the lust of others. We ask that you would create in us a clean heart. We ask that you would take not your spirit from us. And we ask that you would bless our marriages. We ask that your covenant love for us might be growing and bearing fruit in the marriages in this church. We ask that we might taste the sweetness of your love for us by the sweetness of the love of our spouses that we receive and the love that we offer to them. Change us, heal us, and restore us In the name of Christ. And all God's people said, amen.